I was at my friend's house not too long ago, and we decided to watch a movie. We decided that we were going to watch The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is my favorite movie when I was really young. I remember when I was young, I had gone and seen it in theaters, and it was amazing. I was probably in about second grade, maybe third grade at the very most. And my teacher had read us the book, and then we went and saw the movie, my family and I, and it was great. The effects were pretty fantastic. The acting is pretty good, and it was just all around a really good movie. Has it held up over the years? Yes, it's held up extraordinarily well. It wasn't until after we had finished the book and after I had read The Magician's Nephew, which is the first book in the Narnia series, that a lot of the things in the movie seemed to make sense. For example, spoiler alert, in the book, the illustration of the wardrobe keeps it very simple, very plain, like it's just a plain old wardrobe, and the room is fairly empty, save for the wardrobe and a glass bottle in the windowsill. However, in the movie, the wardrobe is covered with this large tarp, and that's pretty much the only thing in the room. And the wardrobe is very ornate. It's been decorated, which is really pretty cool. And it wasn't until after I read the first book that everything on the wardrobe made sense. They weren't just designs, they were references to the first book. Like there was the tree that the pear came from, there was the bird in the tree, there was the sculptures of the lion, and a lot of other details. I haven't read the book in ages, so I'm not going to be able to name all of them, but I can indeed mention those details in particular. I mean, I'm reading the book to my brother right now, and it's the first time I've read the book in forever, so I'm noticing some things that weren't there the first time. And there are differences, of course, there would be in any translation of book to movie. For example, Susan is the one who suggests they take the coats in the book, and she says, "We're not even taking them out of the wardrobe." But then in the movie, it's Peter who says that. However, that's not important in the matter, really. It's a book going to movie, things will have to change. But I can still say it was pretty good. I mean, considering how it came out around 10 years ago now, the effects are beautiful. The lion is really impressive, even by today's standards. Um, when he walks, you can see the grass moving. And I was watching some behind the scenes extras once, and there were very few times where they used an actual puppet. And there were a lot of other cool things on the side that I had pointed out while watching the movie. So, how does the movie go? Well, it starts with an air raid over London, and there's a small family of four children and their mother who are in the house. The bombs start falling and they have to get to the shelter, but as they're all about to go in, the second youngest, Edmund, he has run back inside. Peter goes chasing after him, and it turns out Edmund wanted to get a picture of his father who was away in the war. So here we get some what could be foreshadowing as to Edmund's character after they put him back in the bunker. Peter is yelling at him, "You're so selfish, you could have been killed. Why don't you think? You're an idiot," that type of stuff. So after that, the next scene is them getting onto a train to go out of the country. Now, this was seen in another movie. It was seen in Peter Pan, or at least referenced to, where in World War II, they would put children on the train and ship them off across the countryside to safer parts. This way, the families wouldn't risk having their children killed. So they wait, and then they're picked up by Mrs. McCready, the housekeeper for the professor, who is possibly the magician's nephew from the first book. It's heavily implied. So um, she picks them up, she brings them back to the house, and she's going over all these rules. And then eventually it starts to rain. The kids are all stuck inside. They're playing a really dull game, and then they decide to play hide and seek. Edwin at first doesn't want to play, but he starts anyway. And we see the other children hide. Susan hides in a trunk. Edmund hides in the curtains that Lucy was going to hide in. But then we see Lucy just running around trying to find a place to hide. And then she comes to the spare room. She decides to go into the wardrobe, but not shutting it all the way, as it is very foolish to shut oneself in a wardrobe. And she goes in deeper and deeper, and you can see on her face that she's kind of confused as to why this wardrobe is so large. Then finally she finds herself in Narnia. She goes to the lamppost, and she is uh, she's a little bit confused, but at the same time she has this whimsical look on her face, and understandably too. She's this young girl who is now in this foreign country. It's snowing, it's cold, which is a great contrast to where she had come from, where it was very warm. It was summertime. So she starts looking around, and then she meets this fawn named Tumnus, who brings her back to his cave. Now, fun fact, Tumnus was actually the inspiration for the series. When the author saw one day of a fawn walking through a snowy wood with parcels and an umbrella, the image stuck with him, and that eventually became Narnia. So Tumnus is a pretty important character when you get down to it, even though he's not in the majority of the movie. And you have to think that, yeah, it is pretty important. He does play a huge role. He allows Narnia, the adventures in Narnia, to happen. Had Lucy just wandered off and not met him, they probably wouldn't have had this amazing adventure. Even though he tries to kidnap her at his cave, um, he still shows that he's a good fawn and allows the adventures to happen. So they go back to the cave, and Lucy is looking around. And here's another fun little bit. If you look at the titles on the bookshelf, you can see that the titles were mentioned in the book, such as Is Man a Myth? So Tumnus plays a song on his panpipe, and Lucy falls asleep. There are little images in the fire showing the stag hunt, the fawns dancing with the dryads, all this other thing. And Lucy becomes very sleepy, and she falls asleep. It's now nighttime when she wakes up, and Tumnus is crying in the corner. And she asks why, and he explains the White Witch and how he is working for her. So he runs her back, and it's actually a pretty intense scene. It's dark. They're running through the snowy wood. It's intense. And then she lets him keep the handkerchief, and then she runs back to the wardrobe, stumbles out of it, and is saying, I'm back. I'm all right. And her siblings are confused because no time at all has passed. Maybe 1 or 2 seconds, but for the most part, not a lot of time has passed between then and when she stumbled out of the wardrobe. So they don't believe her at all, understandably, and for a while she starts to get upset. But then one night she decides to look into the wardrobe and a breeze blows her candle out, and she knows that Narnia is there. Edmund, however, sees her do this and follows her into the wardrobe. However, instead of following her to meet Mr. Tumnus, he meets the White Witch. She gives him a drink, gives him Turkish delight, and starts inquiring about his family. And you can see when she first meets him, she just seems so confident. But after he mentions that he's a human, that he has brothers and a brother and a sister, you can see that her face almost full of fear. It's almost as if she realizes the prophecy is about to come true, and she does not want this to happen. So she tries to get the human on her good side, and her plan is to get all of them to her house, her castle, and most likely to execute them. So Edmund returns with Lucy, and he says that they were pretending together. And Lucy gets really upset over this. So things between them aren't the best for a while, and then they're playing cricket one day. Edmund is playing, he's up to bat, I guess you could say, and Peter throws the ball, Edmund hits it, and breaks the window. So, if you think about it, when the kids go back inside to investigate the damage, and then they start trying to hide in the wardrobe, in the book, they were hiding from one of Mrs. McCready's house tours. In the movie, they're ducking responsibility pretty much. In fact, that is what's going on. So they go, and then Edmund finally leads them to the wardrobe. He's like, in here, and they're all like, oh, you've got to be kidding. But then finally they decide to go inside, and they stumble into Narnia. Now, their reaction here probably wouldn't be the typical reaction of finding a world in wardrobe. Then again, I've never done that, so I wouldn't know the typical reaction. However, they're fairly quick to accept it. And in the book, too, it's just like, oh, wow, this is incredible. Oh, well, we might as well accept this. Yeah, I don't have much of another choice. But it is a fairly cute scene how they're saying, this is impossible. And then Lucy just says, I'm sure it's just your imagination. So that's where the adventures begin. They go to meet Tumnus, but he's been taken by the secret police. But I'm really curious as to who wrote that letter. Was it Gabrick? Did Jadis write it herself? Her secret police are wolves. The last time I checked, wolves aren't too great at writing, let alone writing these semi-long, very lengthy, very important notes, and then signing them. However, it's Narnia. Whatever happens will happen. So they leave the cave, and then they come across the beaver who starts helping them out. Mr. Beaver takes them back to his dam, and then starts telling them about the prophecy. So, the beavers are animated very well, and I love them. They seem very much like a married couple. It's believable that they are married, and it is really cute the way they interact with each other. Both Ben with, oh, you couldn't have given me 10 minutes notice when she sees the children. And then later on the frozen river when she's like, you've been sneaking helpings, haven't you? And Mr. Beaver just replies with, well, you never know which meal's going to be your last, especially with your cooking. So that was pretty cute. So then when they're at the dam, the beavers start telling them about the prophecy of Aslan. So you can see Edmund like, who's Aslan? And then you eventually, as Mr. Beaver's explaining, you see Edmund disappear from the shot. Now this is him sneaking off to meet up with the White Witch. So Peter, when he sees that Edmund is gone, starts saying, I'm gonna kill him. And Mr. Beaver simply replies with, you might not have to. Has Edmund ever been to Narnia before? So Edmund is returning to the White Witch, probably to get more Turkish delights. So he doesn't have his coat here. He had forgotten it with beavers and decides not to go get it. So he goes, he goes to the White Witch's castle, and this is also a pretty cool scene. There are all these statues, and Edmund is just wandering around, and then he sees this lion. And in the book, it explains that Edmund thought that this was the great Aslan, that he had gone to stop the witch and had been stopped himself. So he draws on the animal's face with burnt sticks. So back to the movie, he does that there as well, but it doesn't explain his motive too much. So he's going to meet the witch, and then he goes to step over what he thinks is a statue, but it turns out to be Mogrim just taking a little nap. However, he can sense that Edmund is there, pushes him down, and then demands what he's doing. And Edmund tries to explain his relation to the White Witch, so Mogrim brings him to the throne room. He goes to fetch the queen, and then Edmund is admiring the throne. And then the witch comes, and she starts talking to him very similarly to how she did when they first met. However, she seems more tense here, and we can see she is very tense after he says how he doesn't have his siblings. When she realizes that his brother isn't stupid and that his sisters aren't deaf, she starts saying, how could you come alone? He starts trying to save himself. He's saying, I brought them halfway, and he's not really rewarded too much for this. He asks for more Turkish delight, and then he gets locked up with a hard biscuit that's probably frozen and a mug of frozen drink. I don't know what it is. So yeah, he's pretty miserable, and he winds up meeting Mr. Tumnus there. And they start talking about Lucy, and eventually the witch joins them and tells Mr. Tumnus that Edmund had gave him up. So, back to the other kids. The other children have to get out of the dam immediately, or the wolves are going to catch them. So they pack a few things, and Mrs. Beaver tries to justify why they're packing all this stuff, and this is another part of how much they're like a married couple, when she starts saying things like, you get very cranky when you don't have food, or something along those lines, and then, you think you'll need jam? Mr. Beaver is just like, I'm cranky now! And then Peter says, we won't need jam unless the witch has toast. And it is, despite it being a very intense scene, it's also fairly humorous. They throw in a couple of jokes to make it so the younger audiences aren't too intimidated by this scene. Because we have to remember, this movie is what, PG or even G? So They can't have these really super scary moments. They have to have something lighthearted there. So the wolves start going up to the dam, and fun fact, in the extras, they actually had said that they had to airbrush out the wolf's tails, and they even had to get rid of the wolf dog who was playing Malgrim because the dog goes up to the window but then loses interest, so they had to insert a CGI Malgrim to go look at the window. So the kids, the remaining kids, I should say, and the beavers go through this tunnel, and they're running, and then they come to a bunch of dead ends here and there, and eventually Mr. Beaver starts saying how, oh, this tunnel leads to badges, and then Mrs. Beaver says, we said it was Vietnam! That was another one of their scenes I really enjoyed, because, again, I just love those characters. So, they come to the dead end, and again, with the Beavers, she says, you should have brought a map. But then Mr. Beaver says, there wasn't room next to the jam. And they have to climb out of the tunnel. And when they do, Lucy stumbles over some statues, and Peter and Mr. Beaver close the tunnel with a barrel. So Mr. Beaver sees that his friend has been turned into stone along with all these other creatures. And this is again seen in the book, only in the book, we actually follow the witch as she goes and she finds this little group of creatures who are celebrating, and then she turns them all into stone. Now, both in the book and in the movie, this is a fairly emotional scene, at least for some viewers that I know of. See, we haven't met Badger. We have yet to meet Badger. In fact, we don't know anything about Badger at any point in the movie. However, you can see the look on the kids' faces as they look at all these statues who are once these living creatures that were turned into stone and now essentially they're gone. So Mr. Beaver, of course, he starts getting upset. However, they can't afford to get too upset. And then a fox comes and he starts telling them about how he had gotten the chance to live because he didn't arrive in time to save them, unfortunately. However, he does give them cover. It is also another intense, and at the same time somewhat lighthearted scene when Beaver accuses this being the fault of the fox, and the fox is saying how, oh, I'm on your side. I may look like one of the bad guys, but we can discuss breeding later. And basically what he's referring to is how he's a fox, so he looks kind of like a wolf. So the kids and the beavers climb up in a tree, and then the wolves break out of the tunnel, and the fox is trying to cover up for them. So he's trying to avoid the conflict altogether by saying, oh, evening, gents, how are we? And stuff like that. But then when one of the wolves bites him and holds him in its jaw, he has to, quote-unquote, confess to where they're headed, and he just tells them that they're going north. So the wolves run off, and everyone comes down from the tree, and they start helping the wolf, the fox, excuse me, and he starts telling how Aslan is on his way. So this is very good news for the children. So after they learn of this, they start heading off once again. So they're going all over the place, heading off to the stone table. And there are times where we go back and forth between Edmund and the White Witch and the kids. So as the movie goes on, eventually we get to where they're coming up over the frozen lake that leads to the frozen river, which is a very dramatic part of the movie. So they have to walk across this frozen lake, and it's a long distance. They're not too excited to walk this distance, but they know they have to. Meanwhile, Edmund and the White Witch are setting off in her sleigh. So later on, the kids are going across the lake, the beavers are in front of them, and Mr. Beaver starts telling them to hurry up. Then Peter is joking around with Lucy, picks her up, and says, "If he tells us to hurry up one more time, I'm going to turn him into a big fluffy hat." So then Mr. Beaver starts urging them to hurry, and then Lucy says, "He's getting a bit bossy," but then the beavers are saying, "No, look behind you, here she comes." And you can see that there is a sleigh coming towards them. So they start running, they are scared out of their minds, and finally they get to the edge of the lake. Realistically speaking, I know I should not be saying this here, but realistically speaking, they should not be able to outrun those reindeer. Seriously, they just shouldn't. However, you can see where the distance is being closed. I don't know if maybe the reindeer started getting tired and then moving slower, or if the kids just found boosts of energy and ran even faster. But even in Narnia terms, it just doesn't seem like they should be able to outrun the sleigh unless, again, the reindeer slowed down or the kids just found the adrenaline boost they needed to run even faster. So they make it out, and then they come to this little indentation in the earth. So they use that as a means to hide, and then the sleigh stops over them, and we see a shadow come to the edge to investigate. And then the children are just hiding and they're scared. The shadow disappears, and a few seconds later, Lucy wonders if maybe the witch has gone. So Mr. Beaver goes out to check, but he gives them good news. There's somebody good to see them. And he says, "I hope you've all been good." So they go up, and there's Father Christmas. And we learn early on in the movie the significance of this. Christmas has not been to Narnia for hundreds of years. It's always winter, but never Christmas. So this is really actually pretty huge. The kids go up to Father Christmas, who gives them all these different gifts. He gives Susan a bow, he gives Peter a sword, and he gives Lucy a dagger and a fireflower cordial. Then he starts saying how he has a lot of work to do, and he pulls off. And he had mentioned that winter was almost over. And then Peter comes to the conclusion, you know what winter being over means? No more ice. So their shortcut begins to melt. They come to the waterfall, and the river is breaking apart. You can see up in the waterfall itself, the water is building up. And Lucy tries to think of something semi-optimistic. She says, "Don't think it's built down." And then Mr. Beaver explains, "We're not that fast." So they go to the river, and they start trying to cross. However, the ice seems very unstable. So Mr. Beaver goes to cross. But then they see the wolves, and the kids just have to start trying to hurry, but the wolves get down there too soon. So this is another pretty intense scene. They're standing on this river that's about to break apart, and Peter has his sword drawn, and Mr. Beaver tries to scare off the wolf, but one of the wolf's hench wolves, I guess you could call him, bites the beaver and pins him down. And they're all giving Peter different means of advice. Susan is saying, just drop it, listen to the wolf. Just because a man in a red coat gives you a sword doesn't make you a hero. So Mr. Beaver is saying, no, kill him. Get him while you have the chance. So eventually, one of them notices that the river's about to break apart. So Peter just shoves his sword into the iceberg, little ice floe, I should say, that they're still on. The waterfall crumbles, and oh my god, it is amazing. It was amazing then, it's still pretty amazing now. The wave comes down and it pushes them across, and you see this really rapid river, and there's nothing for a moment. The wolves are gone, the kids are gone, but then you see the pommel of Peter's sword rise up out of the water. And this is the scene I watch very closely after my first viewing. You can see Peter struggling to hang on to Lucy. Susan, however, is fine. The beavers are swimming next to them, and they're going with the river, and eventually they come to the edge of it. And they get off, and Lucy is gone. Peter just has her coat. Every single time I watch that movie, I watch to see the scene before they make it to the bank where Lucy is. I want to see exactly where she falls off, but I can never exactly pinpoint it. Maybe in the few shots before they make it to the riverbank, but for the most part, no, I can't see. Now, this is another fairly serious, that turns very lighthearted moment. When they think that Lucy has drowned, Susan starts shouting for her, Lucy, Lucy, where are you? And then Lucy just comes off all cute and innocent-like, and she says, has anybody seen my coat? But then the beavers tell them optimistically that they don't need the coats anymore because spring has finally come to Narnia. And then they began heading off to Aslan's camp. And meanwhile, the White Witch is setting up camp. However, we don't see it just yet. They make it to Aslan's camp, where they're all taken care of, they're dried off, they're given new clothes, and Aslan and Peter start to talk about the upcoming war, and it has been mentioned that they were supposed to stay out of a war, but now they're being thrown right back into one. So they're just talking, and then it cuts to Susan and Lucy. Susan and Lucy are talking, they're near the river, and then they were saying how fun it used to be when they were kids, and then Lucy said, then you got boring. So they start having a tiny splash fight in the river, and then they go to get a towel to dry off, but behind it is Malgrim. And he's saying how he's going to kill them, but then Susan throws the sheet over him. And then back at Peter and Aslan, you can hear Susan's ivory horn. So Peter goes running to find her. And they do find the girls in the tree with the wolf biting at their heels. So it is fairly scary as far as scenes for young kids go. And the wolf is trying to get them. It's trying to kill them. So Peter draws his sword against Malgrim. And Aslan is telling the others who have come to help, no, this is Peter's fight. So Malgrim starts trying to talk down to Peter, starts trying to say that he's no king. So he pounces at Peter, But then, as it would turn out, Peter stabbed Malgrim, and now Malgrim is dead. So the other wolf tries to run off back to camp, but Aslan tells his soldiers to go and follow, because the wolf is going to lead them to the camp. Then we cut to the camp where we see all the monsters preparing themselves for battle, and their stealth rattle, and Edmund is tied up to a tree, and he's a bit gagged at the moment, so he can't really scream. And Gannibrick, the dwarf, is trying to intimidate Edmund. And Edmund at this point is a bit traumatized, as you can imagine. He's been kidnapped, he witnessed a witch turning a fox into stone. He probably witnessed a lot of other creatures being turned into stone at this point in time. So, Gannibrick is trying to intimidate him. But then in comes Aslan's troops. The White Witch and her Minotaur soldier go to check out the damage, and a lot of her monsters have been killed. And here we can see that not only is her crown significantly smaller, but she's wearing a different skin. Now, when I first saw that, I was convinced it was Malgrim's skin, but now it's definitely not. You can tell. I mean, this is taking place shortly after. I doubt very seriously that she would have had time to locate Malgrim, turn him into this scarf-like accessory, and then wear him, even with her witchy powers. So, Edmund has returned, and Aslan tells the others that there's no reason to speak of what has happened. And he joins his siblings, and it's a nice reunion. And then the witch comes back. Again, her crown's significantly smaller, and has to make a deal with Aslan. And then as the witch leaves, everybody is cheering, but Lucy happens to see an unhappy stare in Aslan. So, later on, after they've had a bit of training, the girls follow Aslan. They follow him to the stone table, where he is about to be sacrificed in Edmund's place. And here's a scene where I had noticed something that I hadn't noticed right away. If you look at Susan's quiver, you can see SP for Susan Pevensey. I never noticed that until that scene right there. That scene was shown in a video game, which I've played 1,000 times by now. That scene has been in the movie every other time I've seen it. But it wasn't until just about last week where I saw the movie again that I noticed SP. And it's pretty clever now that I think about it. It was just a little subtle detail that probably went under a couple of people's radars. But now that it's plain to see, it is indeed plain to see. So, Aslan is going to be sacrificed. He's shaved, he's bound, and then he's brought up to the table. And this is one of the very few scenes where they have the puppets. And the witch reminds Aslan that his word at this point in time means nothing. Edmund's still gonna die, so she's about to kill him. And he just has this look in his eyes, and that was a fairly emotional scene. Even though I've seen the movie, I've played the game, I know Aslan's going to come back, but still, I just feel something every time I see him about to be sacrificed. So the girls are unhappy, of course, when he is sacrificed. Then they go to join him after the witch's army has gone. Meanwhile, the boys are getting ready for war, and the girls are just with Aslan. They're grieving. They really wish that he was still there. Then they start heading out. But then the table cracks, and Aslan is back. And it's a really happy scene. Like, even though he's not a puppet there, you can tell that he looks a lot like he's really there. It's still really impressive to this day. And then, meanwhile, the boys are fighting. The war is incredible. I can't even describe it. There's griffins and giant eagles dropping boulders down on the army. There's Phoenix that sets the battlefield to fire to act as a barrier for the witch. And her powers make the firewall go down. And she is just attacking. There are centaurs charging. There's creatures getting stabbed and skewered. But there's very little gore, to be honest. And you can see that the battle actually could go either way in the very beginning. See that it's not a very far stretch of the imagination to assume that maybe the good guys will win, or maybe even the witch will win. But then, meanwhile, they're at the witch's castle, Lucy, Susan, and Aslan, and they find Tumnus, and Lucy is distraught. Then Aslan breathes on the statue, and then Tumnus is back. And they do that to many other statues. Now, if you paid attention to Tumnus at all, you can see that his horns have been shaved, which he was worried about in the book. So, back to the battle, there are creatures being turned to stone, there are creatures dying, and then Edmund tries to even the playing field out a little bit. Peter tells Edmund to go get the girls and take them home. He tells Edmund to get out of there, and he starts heading off along with the beavers. But then he sees the witch's wand, and he goes to destroy it. He does indeed manage to break her wand, and then he is stabbed in a. It's also really dramatic, kind of heart-wrenching to see the witch process that her wand is now gone, but now it's just a stick. However, it's really sad to see her plunge at Edmund, thrust it into his stomach. Everything is slow. You can see Peter as he sees his little brother going down. You can see the look of pain and betrayal on Edmund's face as he realizes that this woman, who had been so nice to him before, is now trying to kill him. So he collapses, and Peter goes to fight the witch. And soon enough, Aslan comes and he roars, and he brings this more of a reinforcement. And finally, Aslan starts heading off to the witch, and she's about to kill Peter. She trips him, stabs his arm, puts him into the ground. But then, before she can kill him, Aslan pounces on her, and then we see the final scenes between them. The look of horror on her face, and then Aslan as he finishes the job. Now, here I had always been confused as to what he did and how she died. when we look at her face, was she dead? Did she die of fear right then and there? Or did he, like, eat her face or bite out her throat? Or did he just eat all of her? Because no matter what, it's still a pretty cool scene. However, we don't see Peter rip the sword out of his arm or anything. We just see him standing back up as the witch is killed. The battle suddenly speeds up, and I didn't really understand that part as a kid. I don't think I would have been able to make it better if I were a director, but at the same time, I think it's kind of weird or a little bit cheesy, even. Still, it is pretty cool to watch. And the lion tells him it is done, and then they're going to find Edmund. Ginnerbrook is about to off him, but then Susan shoots him with an arrow. Lucy gives him the medicine to heal him, and then she and Aslan go off to try and undo the damage. Some characters who were turned into stone had broken. Like, we see this griffin flying to the witch, but then she hits him with the wand, and then he turns into stone and hits a rock and breaks into pieces. I don't know if he's coming back or if Aslan's magic will will him to be whole again or what. But then we cut to the castle with the mermaids jumping out of the water, and the cinematography here, along with other places in the movie, is really beautiful. They really get in that beautiful landscape. It's just so gorgeous. And the kids are all dressed up, and here you can see that Thomas's horns are whole again. I don't know if he got them fixed or if it was just an error in some way. But the kids are being crowned. He puts the crown on Lucy's head, Queen Lucy, the stallion, then King Edmund the Just, Queen Susan, the I believe it was, and then King Peter the Magnificent. Now, one of the things I didn't really like about the movie was how it switched from the perspective of Lucy and her being the main character to Peter being the protagonist. Personally, I don't really like when films do that, where they start off with person A but then end on person B. But at the same time, it's a pretty cool story. You can see that at least they didn't take all the focus off of Lucy. At least they didn't take all the focus off of all the characters. But really, the only character who we hadn't seen from their whole perspective was Susan. Like, every other time she's been with her brothers and her sister, and then she never really had any alone time, unlike Peter in the war, or Edmund when he was a prisoner, or Lucy when she first enters the wardrobe. But you know what? Oh well. Still, it was a great movie. And then we cut to years later. And something else that makes me really happy is the fact that they got actors and actresses who did indeed look like grown-up versions of the children who are now adults. And they're chasing after the stag, but then they come across the lamppost, and they're starting to remember, and Lucy, curiously enough, knows what she's doing. She starts heading back to the wardrobe, and there they are, the kings and queens of Narnia, stumbling through the wardrobe again. And then they come out as kids, and the professor comes into the room, and he's like, "What have you been doing in there?" And Peter replies, "You wouldn't believe us if we told you." And he throws the ball to Peter and says, "Try me." Oh my god, that was a fantastic note to end the movie. But then there's more. Then they get to when Lucy tries the wardrobe again, and the professor starts trying to explain that she might not be able to get back in through there. And then she asks, "Will we ever get back?" And he just tells her that maybe. And then the wardrobe opens a crack, there's the light coming through, and then Aslan roars. That was amazing. It's still a really awesome way to end the movie, and yeah, it was just a fantastic movie. To this day, I still feel like it holds up really well. I might have to rewatch it, be a little bit more critical than nostalgic. However, going in with more knowledge of how the movie was made probably helps a lot. And even now, I still will praise it as being a great movie. There are very few negative things I can say about it. However, I will tell you that I'm not fond whatsoever of the sequel. Oh God. I might have to talk about those someday. But it was pretty well acted, and the characters were interesting. Right from the beginning, you can see how they are. Like, with the air raid, you can see that Edmund is a bit selfish. He doesn't like to do what he's told, and we can see that Lucy is very innocent. We can see that she is just this child, and she gets scared, but we can see as the film goes on that she won't always be so scared. She'll be ready and willing to do what she has to protect herself and her family. And Peter, we can see that he's very responsible. Susan, we can see that she does care about her family, even though at times it feels like she puts herself a little bit above the others. And she can get annoying from time to time when she tries to be the adult, but you know what? That is still pretty well written. We can have to assume that she's around. She looks to be like 17 at this point in time. So we're going to have to just assume that she is transitioning between adult and child still. And she wants to be a bit of an adult. She wants to think things through logically. But then when she's thrown into Narnia, she just can't anymore. She's like, well, oh well, logic out the window. But it is a bit of the hero's journey. You can see the kids change over time as they go through Narnia. And it is really, really impressive how they do go through this change, and they're okay with the change, and they welcome it, and it helps them throughout the journey. And they made all these friends, they made foes, they just had the time of their lives. And then going back to the wardrobe, back when they were kids, they have lived full lifetimes, and now they're going back and doing it again. And every other time they go to Narnia, it's probably going to be the same thing. So if you think about it, it's kind of like their way of, it would be their way of living forever. I mean, just go into the wardrobe, let the painting take you, the magical train goes by, and suddenly you're in Narnia. You know, I have to really question those, but you know what? Not right now. And just everything. They could probably live forever if they wanted to, but I don't know if they'd be willing to go through all these lifetimes, meeting new people, and then having to say goodbye after some point in time. Like in the sequel, you can see that they are upset that Cara Paravel has fallen to disarray and that Mr. Tumnus and the Beavers are undoubtedly dead. But yeah, we won't talk about the sequels. I like to pretend that the first movie was the only movie that ever happened. And you know what? If it was, I would be totally satisfied. It was just so beautiful. It was just so well made. And you have to remember that it's 10 years old. I have seen sequels and other trailers for more modern movies, and they have very green screen effects. With Narnia, they do have green screens, but they also build these sets to help blended a little bit better, and it just looks great. They have fantastic makeup designers, fantastic costume designers. Everything about it is just so fantastic. And there are times where I felt like, yes, I am in Narnia, and it's just so incredible. If you've seen the movie and you don't like it, personally, I don't think I could ever see myself disliking it. However, I know that fantasy isn't for a lot of people, so maybe they dislike it because it's just too illogical for them. But you know what? If you're bored and you want to check out something new, or if you're a big fantasy buff, or if you're a fan of if you're a fan of the books, or if you haven't seen it yet, I'd recommend it. I highly recommend it. And if you just haven't seen it before, I urge you to check it out. Well, it's almost been an hour, so all that's left to say is thanks for listening. Have a nice day. Bye.